Imagine walking into a room full of confident professionals, ready for a big job interview, only to be humiliated and dismissed in the blink of an eye. That's exactly what happened to Sarah, a woman who walked into a high-profile company's hiring process hoping for a chance at a new beginning. From the moment she sat down, she felt the judgment in the air. Her modest attire, simple demeanor, and lack of polished corporate jargon made her an easy target for the interviewers' mocking comments. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that Sarah wasn't just some ordinary applicant. As the interview went on, Sarah's confidence began to waver under their sharp criticism. The more they ridiculed her, the more she tried to explain herself, but it was clear they weren't interested in hearing her side. Without warning, they told her to leave, effectively throwing her out without a second thought. But what happened next will leave you speechless. As Sarah walked out, she got a call that would turn everything upside down. It was her husband, the CEO of the very company she had just been rejected by. What seemed like the end of Sarah's journey was only the beginning of a story that no one saw coming. The interviewers had no idea who they were dealing with. As the truth unfolded, the company was about to learn a powerful lesson they would never forget. Stay tuned for the next part of the story to find out what happened when they realized their mistake, and how everything changed in an instant. Sarah stood in the parking lot, her heart racing as she listened to her husband's voice on the phone. "I just got a call from the hiring manager," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "They're saying you didn't meet their expectations. What happened?" She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the frustration and hurt that had been building all through the interview. Her mind was still processing the cruelty of it all, the way they'd laughed at her outfit, the snide comments about her lack of experience. It was as if they didn't see her at all. "Well," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I guess I didn't fit their idea of the perfect candidate." Sarah paused, trying to make sense of the storm of emotions inside her. "But what they don't know is that I'm not just another applicant. I'm your wife, and I never got the chance to tell them that." Her husband, Mark, was silent for a moment. He had always supported her quietly, behind the scenes, but Sarah knew he'd never expected her to be put in a position like this. He had built his company from the ground up, fought tooth and nail for every inch of success. But now, his own employees had turned away the one person he cared about the most, and that thought made him angry in a way that Sarah rarely saw. As Mark gathered his thoughts, Sarah couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. How would he respond to the people who had treated her so poorly? What would he do when they found out she wasn't just a nobody? She didn't have the answers, but she had a sinking feeling that everything was about to change, and not just for her. Back in the conference room, the hiring managers exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of disbelief and unease. They had just dismissed Sarah in the most demeaning way possible, never once considering that they might have made a huge mistake. For them, she was just another face in a long line of applicants, someone they could push aside without consequence. They didn't realize that the woman they had just humiliated was married to the CEO, the very man who had built the company they worked for. But as they gathered around the table, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Claire, the senior hiring manager, could feel a knot forming in her stomach. She had been the one to lead the interview, and something about it hadn't sat right with her. Sure, Sarah wasn't the most polished candidate, but there was something genuine about her, a warmth, a sincerity. Claire had caught glimpses of that, despite the others' sharp criticisms. Now, Claire found herself wondering if she had made a serious mistake. Meanwhile, the other managers were oblivious to the growing sense of doubt. They were still laughing off the rejection, joking about how Sarah's casual attitude was a far cry from what they expected at such a prestigious company. But Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they had missed something crucial. She hadn't known Sarah's connection to Mark, of course, but a nagging thought gnawed at her. What if the CEO's wife was more than just a woman they could dismiss? Back on the phone with her husband, Sarah was finally starting to understand just how deep the situation ran. Mark's anger was palpable, but so was his disappointment. He had worked hard to cultivate a culture of respect and integrity in his company. He couldn't believe the kind of treatment his wife had received. Yet, despite his growing frustration, he hesitated. He knew that responding with anger could only make things worse. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that something had to change. There was more at stake now than just a bad interview. The following morning, Mark's anger had only deepened. He stood in his office, pacing back and forth, replaying the conversation he had with Sarah the night before. How could they have been so cruel? How could the very people he trusted to run his company treat his wife like that? His mind raced with thoughts of how to handle it. The last thing he wanted was to make a scene, but Sarah's hurt was too much to ignore. At the same time, Sarah sat in their living room, anxiously awaiting Mark's decision. She knew he was torn between his loyalty to her and his duty to his company. But as much as she wanted him to stand up for her, she didn't want to see him lash out in a way that would cause even more damage. After all, the people who had treated her so badly were also part of the team that had helped build his success. It was a delicate balance, one that weighed heavily on both of their shoulders. Meanwhile, the hiring team at the company had no idea what was coming. They were back in their usual routine, planning for future interviews and discussing candidates they had yet to meet. But Claire, the senior manager, couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a serious mistake. She replayed Sarah's interview in her mind over and over again. There had been something genuine about her, something they had completely overlooked. And now, the more she thought about it, the more she wondered if they had just turned away the wrong person. The tension in the office grew, and as the morning wore on, Claire couldn't help but wonder. What would happen when Mark found out the truth? The thought lingered in the air, heavy with the anticipation of what was to come. Would he call for a confrontation? Would he turn everything upside down? The questions piled up, leaving a sense of dread hanging over the entire company. As Mark mulled over his next steps, the situation took an unexpected turn. Just as he was about to make a call to the company's HR department, he received a strange message from an unknown number. The text was brief but ominous. "I hope you know what you're doing. Your wife's rejection wasn't a mistake, it was planned." Mark's heart skipped a beat as the words sank in. Who could be behind this? Was it a warning or something more sinister? At first, he dismissed it as some kind of prank, but the more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. Who would want to target Sarah like that? He knew his company had been facing some internal tensions lately, especially among the senior management team, but this felt different, personal. His gut told him there was more to this rejection than just a few rude interviewers. It felt like there was a deeper game being played, one he wasn't yet seeing. Meanwhile, Claire couldn't shake the unease that had settled over her. She had been troubled by Sarah's interview all day, but now, as she sat at her desk, something seemed off. Her mind kept drifting back to the mysterious message she had received earlier that morning. It was a screenshot, sent anonymously, showing a series of private emails discussing Sarah's interview, emails that made it clear the decision to reject her had been made long before she even stepped into the room. Claire's heart pounded. It wasn't just a bad interview or a misjudgment. Someone had orchestrated this. But who and why? She couldn't help but feel she was standing at the edge of something much larger and darker than she had ever imagined. The stakes were rising, and now it was clear. Sarah's rejection was just the beginning of something far more dangerous. Mark didn't waste another moment. The mysterious message had changed everything. He called Sarah immediately, telling her to meet him at the office. He needed answers, and fast. As she arrived, Mark wasted no time explaining what he had uncovered. The rejection wasn't just a mistake. It was a deliberate act orchestrated by someone inside the company. Sarah's face went pale as she listened, her thoughts racing. But who could be behind it? They decided to confront Claire. If anyone knew what was really going on, it was her. When they walked into Claire's office, the senior manager's face immediately went pale. There was no time for pleasantries. Mark came straight to the point, demanding to know the truth. Claire hesitated, clearly uncomfortable under their scrutiny. Her eyes flickered nervously between them before she finally spoke. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she stammered. I didn't think it would go this far, but someone from within the company had been planting seeds about you, Sarah. They said you weren't fit for this company because you weren't corporate enough. They knew you were married to Mark, and they thought. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, interrupting her. The moment Claire opened it, Sarah's jaw dropped. Standing there, with a smug grin on his face, was none other than Tom, the company's CFO. He stepped inside without hesitation, his calm demeanor betraying the storm that was brewing. You didn't think I'd let you in on everything, did you? Tom said, his voice cold. The whole thing was my idea. I wanted Sarah out of the picture. She's been a distraction for too long. Mark and Sarah stood frozen, stunned by the betrayal. Tom wasn't just a colleague, he was someone they had trusted. As the truth finally hit them, the weight of what had just been revealed left them speechless. Tom had played them all from the start, but that wasn't the end. In a chilling final twist, Tom's grin widened as he added, "And now it's too late." Mark's blood ran cold as Tom's words echoed in the room. His mind raced, trying to piece together the full scope of the betrayal. How long had Tom been planning this? How much had he manipulated from behind the scenes? The revelation felt like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, all Mark could do was stare at his former trusted colleague. But as Sarah stepped forward, her expression one of quiet resolve, something shifted. "You think this is over," she said, her voice steady, though every word carried the weight of her hurt. "You might have thought you could take me down, but you've just exposed yourself. And you're not going to get away with it." Tom's confident smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. Mark stepped forward, his voice firm. "You've crossed a line, Tom. You've been playing with people's lives, their careers, all for your own gain. And now the truth's out." The tension in the room was palpable as the realization settled in. Claire, who had been complicit in the scheme, now seemed unsure, regret written all over her face. I never thought it would come to this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't know he'd go this far." In the end, it was the company's board of directors who acted swiftly. With irrefutable evidence of Tom's manipulation, along with Claire's involvement, both were swiftly removed from their positions. The scandal rocked the company, but as Sarah and Mark stood together, side by side, they knew they had won. The lesson was clear. Appearances could be deceiving, and sometimes the people you trust the most could turn on you when you least expect it. But through it all, Sarah learned that her worth wasn't defined by anyone's judgment, especially not those who couldn't see past their own ambitions. Mark, too, realized that true strength wasn't just in building a company, but in standing by the people who mattered most. And as they walked away from the chaos, they knew the battle had been hard, but together, they were stronger than ever.